Well, hello, my friend. Ed, how was your 4th of July weekend?
I got to say it was fantastic. We had a weather that wasn't conducive to all the plans that we had, but I got to spend time with family, and most importantly for my youngest son and my oldest son joined in and got to let off quite a few fireworks. Had a really good time. How about yours, Rob?
Thanks for asking. We came back from Missouri to go to the best backyard 4th of July fireworks I'd ever been to. In fact, somebody mentioned someone spent $8,000 to put that together. And I'm telling you, I think it was more like $80,000. It was pretty phenomenal.
That had to be great. My son didn't quite hit the $1,000 mark. Now, bear in mind, he's 19 years old. Those fireworks went off for quite a while.
That's awesome. What a privilege it is to be able to actually even have a podcast to talk about whatever we want to talk about. And in the light of the celebration of the 250th national birthday, if you will, it just blows me away, pardon the pun, that we can come and talk about stuff, and just honored to be able to think about how the country was formed, which actually made me think about what we should talk about in this segment. And here's what came to mind. George Washington, of course, came to mind because of all the stuff that was going on there. And actually, the movie came out this weekend, the Young Washington movie. And I'm telling you what, you need to watch it. I'm trying not to do any spoilers if somebody's going to watch this before they watch that movie. I'm just wanting you to know, go see it, because I found it to be very encouraging. That's what this point is today. Let's talk a little bit about history, a little bit about leadership and courage that was needed then and today.
You said spoiler alerts, Rob. Make sure that you don't tell the group that he was our first president. Go ahead.
Well, someone will try to correct us on that because there was someone else who was actually the first president.
That's true. Before you get away from the 4th of July too far, Rob, because you asked about the celebration, and I'm smiling a little bit to myself, because what's the first thing we used to say about babies? They're healthy, it's a boy, you give their dimensions, and you say 10 fingers, 10 toes, right? And I could say that after watching my son let off all those fireworks. Yeah, we came away 10 fingers, 10 toes, and everybody's healthy.
Well, great success in that. That's awesome. The one thing about the movie, what came to mind once I started thinking about, there's this Young Washington movie. I never thought of President George Washington as a young man, really, which is kind of sad. But the reason I say that, I probably did because I have gone to Mount Vernon and looked at different things. But what I've not really done is thought about him as an emerging leader. At one point, he was just a young boy trying to make his way in the world, and he had some ambition. And by the way, speaking of ambition, by the time he was 21, he was a diplomat for the crown to go to the French, which when I was 21, I think I was a private in the Army.
I was a little higher than private, but I was still in the Army, and they certainly weren't allowing me to be a diplomat for anything.
When he was 22, he became lieutenant colonel. He got the promotion lieutenant colonel, and I'm like, maybe I got E4. I don't know exactly at that age, but certainly a lot of interesting things there. He was still a young, emerging leader, and that's why it's kind of fun to talk about him today. And again, I'm trying not to spoil too much, but that's really fun to think about him as a young man versus the stoic, respected president and general that we often think of him as.
I think that's a strong point, Rob. And we've talked about that, when you're picking out those that you want to emulate, those that you want to follow. I want to be just like that person. We want to be them in the position that they are, right?
That's right.
We don't think of where they came from. I'm not going to fault you for the old person thing. I think that had something to do with the tradition of the white wigs, et cetera. Maybe that's what threw us off a little bit.
Which we could go down a whole nother podcast on the wigs probably. But until I get my wig, maybe we shouldn't talk about wigs. There were some leadership lessons learned that young Washington got. And of course, I'm not going to cover those necessarily, other than say he really had some ambition. And that's part of everybody who's trying to make something of themselves. They have things they want to accomplish. But he also had some failures, which is very interesting. I don't often think about those failures. And again, failures make you, if you actually handle that properly, they make you a better person. They make you a better leader. And that is something you can see. It's evident in the results. You can see it in the movie. And as I think about that, he actually faced some very difficult choices. And it actually took courage to do a lot of the things he had to do when he was young, when he was in just being a normal civilian, and then when he became general and president again. Courage was a very important piece. And that's what I want to focus on today. Actually thinking about the word courage, what's the origin of it? I went and looked that up, and just my summary of it, the idea of courage was it's about the heart. And the heart was thought to be the center of everything around your emotions, your will, your character, your strength, and your convictions. And so the heart drove everything. And so to have courage, like, literally means to have heart. And it's not just one single aspect. It's a much broader situation of all the conditions going on with your whole person.
You mentioned just a little bit about failure on George Washington's part. I think it'd be good actually to touch on that just a little bit, Rob. I don't think that's giving away too much of the movie. I haven't seen the movie.
Yeah.
What was it? What failures were you referring to?
Yeah, well, it's not like I'm going to blow the secret from the movie, but it's really in regards to the Battle of Fort Necessity and how George had made the decisions around where to put the fort, how to defend the fort, what to do with all the troops that were coming in and going out. And again, I don't want to ruin that, but it turned into a big disaster, and he had to surrender. And that had to be something, as a young, ambitious, military-minded person, which is all he wanted to be, was military, how distraught he must have been during that time. Not just the loss itself at that point, but even following then. It rides with you. You lose people in war, you lose people in battle, you surrender the whole thing, and you wonder, what was it for? So there's a big opportunity there to reflect, and we can talk more about that too.
And I know we're going to talk about a few different ways to look at courage, or a few different ways to use courage, or that we have to find courage. I think you mentioned that George Washington had ambitions to be an officer, right? He had an ambition to be a red coat officer. And so that took courage. Anybody that goes into battle, or anyone that signs up to go into battle, that takes a certain amount of courage. But when you're talking about an emerging leader and you go out and that's your goal, you haven't just been thrown into that position. This is what I want to be. Now you're talking about a different type of courage. You have that epic failure, and you have to have that courage to continue to push forward, that courage not to oversimplify it, but to make another attempt, right?
That's right. And courage is what gives you the ability to take the next attempt. And that's especially important for emerging leaders to know. And we all need to have the courage to take the next step in whatever challenge we're facing, small or large.
Ironically, when you're talking about that courage, sometimes it takes more courage in the small things than it does in the grandiose.
Well, let's get into the forge.
This is the hard part, Rob. This is where we take the words and the examples and put them to use.
Welcome to the Forge. I'm excited to talk about this era. You think about Forge freedom and Forge character and the things that we talk about. When you're talking about George Washington and you're talking about the Revolution, what was happening? Well, they had blacksmiths through their towns, and they were very integral, very important for the local work, the farm work, and even the military. It's kind of fun to think about how we're talking about that era where forges were really important. It's not just symbolic like it is for us here, and we want people to do great things and build themselves. I mean, they actually relied upon them. Like I said earlier, I remember going to Mount Vernon and walking the whole place. And honestly, I can't remember the forge being there, but I'm sure it was. I wasn't thinking about this stuff at the time, but it's just a neat part of history. And so that makes me excited. I'm glad we can talk about that just a little bit here.
I think you make a really strong point. We use it symbolically. There are people that still do it today, but because we don't have to, that's hard work. That's hard work. And there's a big difference between doing it as a hobby and could you imagine doing it every single day? And that's just a reminder of when we're talking about forged freedom. It's not something that's a one and done. It's not a hobby that we go in and dress. This is something that we need to do every day if we're going to make it work.
I love it because that was the whole idea. I mean, it takes work. You got to do it every day. Even when you don't feel like it, you got to get up and shape that character, shape that that metal that you're trying to form and get it to the right place. So that's a lot of fun. But today, we're really trying to talk about courage as an aspect to the whole emerging leader roles and how important it is. But before we can actually talk about courage, I think we need to talk about why courage is even necessary.
I think in everything we do, there's an element of courage at the beginning. And through repetition, there's less courage needed in that aspect. And then it becomes stronger or moves to another area. Just because it's a small thing. And you and I have mentioned that sometimes the small things take more courage than the grandiose. For George Washington to declare, I'm going to be an officer, I'm going to follow all of these things. Those are great. I can imagine some of the menial tasks that we can remember back during our training thinking, this is ridiculous. This is what I need to do. I wanted to be an officer. I didn't want to worry about making sure my uniform squared away. I didn't need to worry about, it takes the courage for the little things. What? You mean I have to get in front of people and talk? Come on now. So sometimes the little things are where it catches up.
Well, I think there's a lot to think about when when change occurs or we're wanting to change or change is happening to us. There's something that comes along called uncertainty. And that uncertainty produces something we call fear. We don't know how it's going to turn out. We might have some ideas, but in some situations we don't. And so the uncertainty leads to the fear. And in the fear, we start thinking about all the negative things. And I think that's part of understanding. Sometimes it's physical courage that you need. I mean, somebody's really threatening you personally, or if you're on the battlefield, right, there is a threat. But then there's day-to-day or workplace events where you have uncertainty and you have to face them and you're not sure how to do that. And behind that, you've got high risks. The stakes are huge. So if you make this mistake, you try this thing and you fail, are people going to laugh at you? Are people going to give you another shot? Are you going to lose everything you have because you put it all on the line? And so what do you do when that's there?
You fill in the blank, right? You've just explained two very distinct fears. You have a reactionary fear where there's a clear and present danger, and you'll know that because your body has a physical reaction. Physical changes happen immediately. The fear that you're talking about, and I think we're going to address a little more, is the fear of the unknown. And I think in that situation, the courage we need is to fill in the blank appropriately. We're going to fill in the blank with that uncertainty. We're going to use our imaginations, regardless of what it's based on, fact or fiction. We're going to use our imagination, predict the outcome. Then we're going to predict people's reaction to that outcome. Maybe we input the courage there and say, this is my imagination. The outcome is going to be the outcome. On this side of it, I'm going to use my energy and courage to imagine it all works out the right way and everybody's going to respond to it the correct way.
Yeah, I think that's very important. Having courage doesn't mean the fear goes away. Let's be clear on that, because you still have these concerns, you still have these obstacles. And just because now that I'm going to be courageous, nope, the fear may still be all over you. The tiger, if you will, is about to jump on you. You still are facing the real danger or maybe a perceived danger. And that doesn't mean it's going to be all easy just because, I think I'm brave now.
Definitely no, we don't want to take a detour down that road. I'm confident. I know you and I can, and I'm confident that most of our listeners would be able to go back to several situations in their past where they feared the outcome. They went through the situation and the outcome was so much better than what they feared, right?
True.
Again, using that courage, you still have to face the fear.
So, Ed, let me ask, what happens when we let fear control us?
Nothing. And that's what separates the great from the average, or the future that we want from the mundane. You wonder to yourself, how in the world do we have a single person doing this? And most likely it's because nobody else had the courage or used the courage to move past that fear. You ever watch somebody do something? It was the right thing and it worked out perfect. Simple thing. You wouldn't have done it. You wouldn't have stepped outside of yourself for that at all. And you see how simple it was. Really good friend of mine still to this day. we were outside waiting for our first sergeant and the platoon sergeants to get out of what we assumed was a tail eating meeting. And everybody's sitting around, the entire company sitting around, E6s, E7s. I think there were even a couple of E8s out there. The next thing we were moving to was practice for a parade or a change of command ceremony. And that E5 went to the front of the company, probably one of the lower ranking E5s at the time, and gave the command, fall in. And the entire company did. And then he started doing drill and ceremony exercises. And I'm thinking, man, that was so simple, so impressive, the exact right thing to do. And I would have never done it. I would have never done it. After I saw it work, I would have given it a try.
That's so crazy. Imagining what was going on in his mind, like what was he thinking? Why did he do that? That would be curious to know. But he did it. You know, if you got all these high-ranking people above you, and he took charge. By the way, so I don't imagine he just went down to Home Depot and got the courage to do that. Do you?
No, and I don't think that was the first time he used that particular tool. Just like any other muscle that we have, it needs to be built up. It needs to be worked out, and it needs to be ready for when you need it.
Yeah, I mean, you could be in a Home Depot and actually find some courage, because there could be somebody in a situation that needs your help, and you step up to that, or you stand up with the person and help defend them, or whatever the case may be. So I'm not saying you couldn't find courage at Home Depot, but it's not something go buy and put on.
You're not going to find it on the shelf.
That's right.
Menards has those sales that anything you could put in a paper bag, you could have 11% off. I don't think courage would fit in that bag, Rob.
That's right. Well, I think courage does come from a particular place that we need to consider. And that place is your convictions. Because when you have the convictions, something's important to you, it is something you think must happen, it is something that is required to happen, you have a conviction within you, that gives you courage. And then the real question, though, is where do you get the conviction? Where do you find that?
That's where our character, our integrity, where our actual identity comes into play, Rob. That's where our convictions should come from. And eventually that conviction gets so big that we have to use that courage to step forward. I want to ask you, though, have you ever heard anyone say, I'd never have the courage to do that? Have you heard that?
Yeah, not necessarily verbatim, but yes.
And I wonder, I think that's one of the things that we all have. Just like any other muscle, the more we use it, the stronger it gets. I don't think necessarily one person is given more than the other. It's just a matter of one person uses it more than the other.
Well, how do you start using it? That's the key. The convictions are built on something, and I think we should cover those real quick. So one of them is faith, which we'll dive into that. Another one is actually the vision and mission of your life. I mean, with stuff we've been talking about. Another one is experience. And maybe the fourth one in this to throw in there would be the partners you have, or the people you have in your life. So just to drill in on that a little bit, for you to have a conviction on something, you need to have a belief and value about it. That's why I'm saying you have to have faith that it's important. You have to have faith that you follow and say, I agree with that, because if you don't agree with it, you're not going to be convicted.
We can't oversimplify our friend fear that we just talked about. You can have all of those convictions and still allow fear to prevent you from moving forward. That's when we're using fear as an antagonist. As an antagonist, it says, what's going to happen to me if I step forward? When your convictions become strong enough and you pay close enough attention to them, and your fear changes to what's going to happen if I don't do this for others, now your fears become a protagonist and a motivator. It's still there. One of my favorite sermons, the story about the Good Samaritan, when he talked about those that passed by, he stated, and he used his imagination, but those that were passing by probably paused to think, what's going to happen if I stop to help? What's going to happen to me if I stop and help this individual? And then the Good Samaritan, who gave the good example, said, what's going to happen to this man if I don't stop? What's going to happen to this wounded person if I don't stop? Same thing with your convictions. You're convicted, whatever it is, safety, faith. We talked about values. We talked about what's going to happen if I don't step up.
I think that's really good to consider the decisions that are made there. Not unlike Washington, the decisions are me focused or they're you focused. And that makes a big difference. And that makes me think about the vision. Like, what vision do you have? What really I'm trying to get to is that if you understand what is on the other side of this obstacle or this thing that has caused you concern is more important. It is maybe glorious even. And once you have that vision as a part of this is why I'm doing it, this is what's got to happen, whether it's for someone else or maybe it's for your future or whatever the reason, then that adds to your conviction. And really, you have to have the faith, you have to have beliefs and values that all that stuff is possible. You have to have hope, right? And so that's what the vision offers. It offers you hope. And the reason that it's unknown and it's scary is because it's unseen. That's one of the things that will help us move forward is if we can see it in our mind, even if there's no evidence anywhere else, that'll give us a lot of strength.
And I think, again, I can't give away the movie because I haven't seen it. But what you described with George Washington, his immediate fear of being embarrassed or being ridiculed, or quite possibly as a leader, having his subordinates think less of him because of his previous surrender. What if word got out? Those are all immediate consequences. Because he had the vision of what he wanted to be in the future, that's where he could change that into instead of what's going to happen to me right now, what's not going to happen to me in the future for the good. I'm not going to be able to move forward. I'm not going to achieve that goal based on that vision or that future that I've planned.
Yeah, that's right, which can cause all sorts of additional fears if you think about the negative impacts. Not to say you shouldn't, but certainly can have an effect upon you. Now, the good thing is, I mentioned experiences as a part of this analysis of the convictions. You and I, we have done some things and we've done them successfully. And sometimes we even did them successfully on the first try. I know I have to retry things quite a few times to get them right. It doesn't mean I can't do it. Doesn't mean I'm not going to succeed. It just means it might take a little bit more effort. And when you have an experience or experiences in your life, you can draw on those experiences as well and take that and say, that can help my convictions, that can help me go through this because I know it is possible with a little bit more effort and a little bit more time, I can make it so. Now, we hope that there is plenty of time to practice and train and whatever the case may be. In war, you might not have that and you might not get a second chance, understandably. But fortunately, we're talking about day-to-day life here and today.
There's a whole lot to be said about the second opportunity. When you talk about fear and addressing, and the first thing that comes to mind is public speaking or even in doing these podcasts. When the first time you go to do it, you're scared to death. And regardless of how bad it goes, and I've had some horrible experiences, especially with public speaking. I won't go into it, but you remember I even set an overhead projector on fire one time in the church. I've had some really awful experiences, scared to death to do it. Now I'm done. It gave me a little more courage to face it the next time. Like you said, you come back, you regroup, and you go hit it again. At no time during that was I ever so discouraged that I said I wasn't going to do it. And brother, I got pretty discouraged.
Yeah, I know it can be tough. But here's the interesting thing, Ed. If I'd asked you to do a podcast 20 years ago, we both would have said a what? But besides that, you would have said, no way.
You're exactly right.
And so I think you've worked hard. I mean, that's a good point. I'm not just trying to bolster you here. You've worked hard on something that you really wanted to accomplish, which was become a better speaker and be very comfortable with it. And you are there now to the point where, I mean, you're here doing this with me. And so I know you have conviction on how important it is and how well it worked. And I think that's another thing to remember. These experiences are great reminders that you can do things. And it may not be easy. You may want to give up.
We talk about experience, and then you mention partners, whether that's family, friends, coworkers, whether it's the group that you just referenced that will let plug themselves, although I think it's a really good group. That's why it's so important that you surround yourself with those individuals and that you take real care to who you put yourself with. If you're with somebody that doesn't share that same vision or doesn't even attempt to look that far into the future, and you share with them you have these goals and they just completely slam you, that has a really strong impact. And I'm not saying surround yourself with individuals that compliment you on every single thing you do, but they've got to give you a little bit of encouragement. They've got to give you, each one of us could go back to that person that told us no. But more importantly than that, there's so many people that have told us yes. And those are the people, A, that we need to focus on, and B, that we need to surround ourselves with. And we need to be that person for them as well.
That's right. People need us to help them. Now, Ed, here's something I want to just say. The thing I think most important about all of this building courage is actually just making a decision. It's funny how if you make the decisions ahead of time, even, your need to be courageous comes way down because you're not trying to make a decision in the middle of something chaotic. You're not trying to make a decision in the middle of uncertainty because you've actually thought about it a little bit. And so making the decision, I will move forward if this happens, or I will move forward if this happens, is very helpful. And simply making those decisions doesn't make it necessarily any easier, but it allows you to have, as one gentleman will say, spend less calories on that stuff and use the calories in your brain to focus on the problem before you.
Ironically, you could make that big decision. And once you make that big decision, because you've made it, a bunch of little decisions become easy as well. I don't want to keep talking about George Washington, but one of the reasons I made a decision not to be an officer were a lot of the little things that they can or can't do. I guarantee him having that decision or making that life goal allowed for a lot of bypass on certain decisions as you go along. That officers can't do this, can't do that. Their wives are going to participate in this. One of the reasons that I didn't become an officer is their wives are required to do certain things and participate in certain events. And I know my wife, even if she didn't tell me, which she did, that she didn't join the military, they're not going to tell her what to do. So if you look at today as a young person, and I fear so much for them, but with all of the technology and all of the videos everywhere, if you decide at 14 years old that I'm going to go into politics, I'm going to be whatever, you make that decision, you had better start behaving in that manner now, because it's going to have an effect later. It always has. It's always had an effect on your future. It's just more transparent now because everybody has access to it. So that big decision helps with those little decisions as well.
Yeah, and some of the things you just mentioned, my son has made the decision to do what he's done. I hope his wife realizes what that means. So it'll be great though. And the other thing is, making this, like I said, making those decisions and taking the actions before you're ready, you're never actually going to feel ready, probably. I mean, thinking about becoming a parent even, you could be, well, let's wait until this, let's wait until that, and let's wait until we've had 10 classes on parenting. And then after that, you still might not be ready. So sometimes you just have to jump in after you've made the decision, you've done your research, you've done everything you can to prep for it. You just have to go.
And doesn't that save a lot of time, a lot of the fear that we've talked about? Just step into it. You can't do that with everything, but you sure can do that with most things. And when you do, so say you do all of this preparation. You mentioned having a child. You go to the classes, and I did because my wife made me. And you have all of this preparation. Then as soon as I get to the hospital, first of all, they didn't care about my classes. She was in a different situation that resulted in an emergency scenario. So those classes didn't matter at all. That preparation didn't matter at all. And there was no ceremony or no celebration afterwards. That's the other part. You go to college for 2 or 3 years. You kind of want a little celebration at the end. You and I have had that discussion. We graduate high school. We want to have a little celebration. You get all of this buildup, all of this over preparation before you make that step. There has to be just a huge adrenaline drop, especially if it goes right. When it goes right, you're just like, I worried all that time for this.
That's right. So remember how much buildup you did on that last big scary thing and how much it actually was overkill because it wasn't actually as bad as you thought it was going to be, which is usually the thing too, is we have these fears of it's this big monster, big old tiger, like I said earlier. Turns out it's just a house cat and you can pick it up and pet it and it's not a big deal.
Some of them are pretty scary too, Rob, but that's a good example. You know, when you talk about making those decisions and surrounding yourselves around the right people. I remember when I first joined the club that you're referring to, and I'd actually went there the first time, didn't go back for another 10 years, went back the second time, and there was the right, that's a true story. And I know I've mentioned it on here before, 100% true story. And the second time I went, I really I made that decision. I'm going to go through this. I joined the same night as another individual did. I'm still friends with him. And he said it audibly. He said, I'm going to try to give you as many opportunities as you can to talk. So then he put me in some really precarious, positions. I still remember getting a flyer that said comedy by Ed or comedian Ed Witham or something crazy like that. I'm not a comedian. First of all. Second of all, in most other situations in my life, I think I would have been able to back out. But I had made the decision and the commitment that if he makes his part, I'm going to do my part and we're going to move forward. And there were several more of those that were as scary as they could be, honestly. But the decision was made. There's no other thought. So now there's a little bit of preparation. Now I got to move forward with it. And I'm proud to say that they turned out really good. Were they perfect? No, I'm not a comedian. But were they done? Did I get a little more practice? Was I able to say, okay, I can move forward from here? Sure. So again, making that decision and surrounding yourself by those individuals that are going to assist you with that, giving you honest, either positive feedback or constructive criticism, you're moving forward. And you're going to find that fear dwindles and the courage moves forward. My only concern now ever, I used to want to be a dynamic speaker, and I love dynamic speakers, and I probably watch those like individuals follow professional sports teams. I'm not going to say I've given that up. That's not my goal. My goal is now to be heard and to be understood. I tease you all the time for these podcasts when we go back and look at it. I feel like you've got the voice for that. I don't have the voice for it. And for a guy who certainly loves to talk, I'm not going to have that voice. I'm not going to have that calmness now. Maybe I'll get it in the future, but until then, I'm going to keep making those steps forward. I'm going to keep making those tiny steps. We keep referring to the forge, and it's not always the big swings and the heavy hammers that make the fine tuning on that sword or make the fine tuning on that piece that we're working on.
That's right. It's just pinging with consistency, hitting the right spot. We think we have to be perfect in many regards, by the way. You're thinking, oh, I need a certain voice, a certain whatever. No, you don't really. I mean, and the way I believe it is God gave us whatever talent he's given, and you can use that to the best of your ability and let him fill in the cracks. Right. And then it's going to turn out much better. And speaking of cracks, by the way, I'm thinking about how emerging leaders sometimes come to leadership. You know, you and I'm sure we both did it multiple times, probably working for somebody and said, I could do that better. If I was managing this team, if I had control of how this process would go, I could do that better. I would treat people better. I could do so much more. And the people just need to know what I can do for them. What's wrong with that approach, though, in the long run?
First of all, it's very selfish. Second of all, it has to be one of the most uninformed, therefore ignorant statements that could be made. But if I were a betting man, I would bet that every individual that has a leader believes that they could do it better. Every one of them. And you know what, Rob? I guarantee some of them can. What's the difference between the two? Is the courage.
Well, that reminds me of one of the elements to think about here is reflection. You and I think we can do some things better, and then we take on the leadership and we actually try to do it, and we succeed or we fail. But either way, something that's really critical is reflecting upon the changes we try to implement, the failures, the success, the people we had helping us do it or the people we should have had helping us do something. In fact, if you go back to the movie, hint, hint, it's a great element that was used by our first president. But here we are back to not doing spoilers. And anyway, reflection is a great tool.
It's the tool. It's not just in that scenario. It's not just a tool. If you also, when you reflect, need to focus on the good and the bad. And if you're not able to do that with yourself, it's good to invite an accountability partner or someone else in that can assist you with that. So I tried so many different things. We keep, going back to the speaking thing, tried so many different things. And then I would say, well, that didn't work. And I just moved to the next thing. Well, some of it might have worked. Maybe I need to hone that a little bit. Or there had to be some good parts. I think one of my favorite reflections wasn't even about me. We had a speech contest. At the end of the speech contest, this person had done such a great job that there were a couple of us waiting in line to congratulate her. I'm listening to the person ahead of me tell her how good she did. And there was no false humility, but she's saying, no, I messed up this, and no, I forgot that. And two things hit me. Number one, we don't know what you forgot. We don't have your script. And number two, she didn't hear herself the way we heard her. It's good to be self-critical. It's good to that's what we're talking about, is the reflection. But in that, you've got to use some of the positive too. She was great. She was absolutely phenomenal. She was giving herself a hard time. She wasn't taking credit for the good. When you do that reflection, especially as you and I are getting into our older years, only halfway through our plan. Actually, you're a third of the way through. When you do that reflection, make it a set apart time and take notes. Also look at others. You're doing that reflection. So I need to work on this. You look for another individual that's doing it correctly. You could take notes on what they're doing. Hey, I really like that. Hey, I didn't like that. And keep that and review that. Again, that just taking the time to go back and take an honest look at what you've done. And how can you do that? The only way that you can reflect on how you've done is first and foremost to know what you did, and most importantly, to know where you want to be. Well, I didn't make what I want to be. I have to assess where I'm at so I could take those steps to get to that next step.
Yeah, what do I need to do, Nick? Your point about the lady doing this self-criticism, we all do that. And we're the worst critics of ourselves, typically, because we don't just hear it one time. Ed may tell me, Rob, you did a bad job. But I will tell myself that multiple times over and over and over. Man, that was dumb. Why'd you do that? And we continue. We shouldn't do that, by the way. We should address it and say, yes, I missed that. So next time, let me not do it. Write it down. I love it. Write it down. And that'll help you move on and forget about it, because your brain's telling you this was important and you can focus on it. Now, what I also want to think about, something else that happens when you have courage, other people pick it up. It's contagious. So a lot of times a person, an event's happening and somebody should be doing something, but nobody moves. They're all waiting, and you'll see that. But then one person gets up and takes action, and then everyone else will realize or be actually encouraged, or whatever the emotion is, and they will join you. If you stand up for somebody and say, stop doing this, other people will say, yeah, stop doing this to them. And that is something that is great about courage, is you might be alone for a second in some of these things, but if you really are showing the courage that's needed, I don't think you'll be alone for long.
Story that I know you're very familiar with, and it's one of my absolute favorite stories to do with courage, to do with leadership, and to do with deal with the military, is Colonel Chamberlain manning that left flank, I believe is what it was, and completely outnumbered, down to like one or two rounds a person, ready to surrender. And then they hear that rebel yell. And for the first time, or when I first read that story, and I've read it multiple times since in different venues, when I first read that story, I guess I hadn't realized that the term rebel yell literally meant the rebels yelling. Here they come charging up that hill after them. And what did he say? Fix bayonets.
Fix bayonets.
For several seconds, with everybody standing there from a military mindset, you're out of your mind, right? But then you're like, well, he's doing it. I'm going to do it, right? That's our leader. We're going to follow that individual because of his courage. I would imagine he was scared to death. And then when he said charge, oh my goodness, I like to joke about I would have probably turned around and but I know I wouldn't have. Just like them, you're in that now. You're pumped. You see their courage and you charge. So impactful that the guys that did have the weapons and did have the ammunition dropped it and took off running in the other direction. I love it. You're exactly right. It's contagious. It's contagious. But just unfortunately, because we're using the term contagious, just like anything else that's going to spread, it has to start somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. One of the important things that will need courage is having critical conversations with the people that are disruptive and maybe they're being a little cowardly.
One conversation that I have with every young leader is critical conversations, crucial conversations. You have to have those. And believe it or not, I believe that it's harder to do that in certain scenarios than it might be on the battlefield to will up the courage to move forward in a life or death situation. It has to be, or other people would be doing it.
A side thought here, you talk about little steps, the preparedness to actually fix bayonets. Somebody had to make the decision to make sure everybody had bayonets because they might need them. And what if you didn't bring your bayonet? Now what? You don't even have a chance. You're going to run out there with a stick, basically, and do the best you can.
You know, when the military takes away our opportunity to have a decision or an opinion, right? And then they train us on all of these things. What a perfect example that you bring up. I imagine all of the drills that they went through to learn how to fix those bayonets. Could you imagine the conversations you and I might have had if we're standing side by side in a training event? All right, because we always did things by step, right? Step one, do this. Step two, step this. And I can hear myself saying, all right, here we go, bringing a knife to a gunfight. When are we ever going to fix bayonets, Rob? And when you go back and you talk about the butterfly effect in history, that simple command literally changed history. We talk about freedom. We talk about forged freedom. What a monumental point in history where that one seemingly small command or ping that you keep referencing, right, had such a large impact later on. So again, making those decisions, doing the planning, just like you're saying, doing the training, or if you will, doing the repetitious actions leading up to that are what prepared them to be able to follow through on that simple command.
All right, let's hit the marketplace. And with the relationships and the stewardship elements being in the marketplace, let's just talk about this example of a CEO that I actually witnessed this scenario take place. And I won't go into great details, but what I will just say is that an individual was very disruptive to the organization, and it got worse over time. The CEO actually knew about it and didn't really like to address conflict too much. So it'll be okay. It'll be okay. You know, they have good numbers. They are really good at what they do. It's okay, everyone. What does that actually do? Well, lots of people in the organization became agitated, aggravated. They were pitting between two different sides, the CEO and this other person. So the reality of it was the CEO had lost credibility and people were leaving, clients were leaving, customers were leaving. The CEO became under high scrutiny because of all the loss, lots of pressure, and they had to make a decision on what to do. And the right thing to do took way too long to get done. Why was that the case? Simply, they were not convicted in the right way. They had not decided to take action to support the organization because they were more worried about how it might hurt one individual's feelings or how it might be uncomfortable for them to take the action that needed to be taken. So that caused a strife that was not really necessary. And if it would have been addressed early on properly, the customers might not have been agitated and left. The staff who left might not have been. Those who stayed and were stressed out might not have had to go through that. The lack of courage to address someone, and we talked about that on the other side of this, the crucial conversations have to happen, and you have to have the courage to do.
A perfect example of the fear of the initial discomfort or the initial outcome. Like we said in previous podcasts, you're going to have that conversation. That CEO is going to have that conversation. Unfortunately, in the scenario, he's having it after all of the negative impact on the company. Hopefully, he's able to have that still with the individual that's causing the problem. Now he's going to have to add apologies or explanations to the other individuals for having prolonged it. I say hopefully, because in some scenarios, he might be having that conversation with the board of directors on his exit interview to say why I didn't address this. So you postponed the initial pain, right? You let that fear hold you back, and look what it cost you later. So you might have had in that scenario a good case of the fear and your imagination getting caught up and not looking towards that future goal. You're afraid that you might upset that employee, or you're afraid that you might get a reputation now as an angry or forceful leader. So you didn't have the conversation. You probably weren't thinking all these other people were going to drop off. Productivity was going to drop off. You're going to find yourself in a bind, either answering for it because you're not meeting expectations, or maybe even explaining that to your new employer after they relieve you of your current position because you just didn't do your job. And yes, I say how simple. We call them crucial or critical conversations. We're saying that we're applying courage in the face of fear because it is a pretty big deal. But because you didn't do it then, you're going to have a whole new and actually more to deal with it later.
Yeah, one of the things I would say to that is you make me think of something that's usually very positive is compound interest. And, you want compound interest to go in your favor. But in this scenario, if you will, the compound interest built up against you and it built up against the organization. This little issue could have been addressed and it wasn't. Therefore, it compounded and everyone felt more pain than they really should have. I know some people are very direct communicators and they'll tell you what needs to be said right away. Maybe they need to actually have a little filter on that, but there are others who are not direct communicators and they're more worried what might be happening in that relationship or in that conversation than what really needs to happen. And so is it easy for one person to tell other people things that they should? Maybe not, but it doesn't mean you get off the hook. And of course, if you are that direct communicator, you should have the courage to rein in yourself as well and don't just beat somebody over the head.
It don't look like you're having fun with it. Back to that fantastic example in this situation, the initial fear from the CEO is what's going to happen to me, right? What negative impact is this going to have on me and my current work situation? Whether it be negative because the employee that we're not dealing with, once we deal with them, aren't going to give us the same results. So our productivity is going to go down, or that employee is going to turn against me, whatever, where the concentration should have been in the fear of what's going to happen to the rest of the operation. Unfortunately, and every young leader should know this, you're going to spend the preponderance of your time on that 20%. They say, what is it? 40% are just going to do, 40% can be persuaded, and 20% aren't ever going to do. And if you're not careful, you're going to spend most of your time focusing on that, whether to try to appease or whatever. Regardless, your time's going to be spent there, but you need to make sure that you make the corrections in that 20% so that you're not having a negative impact on the 80%.
You mentioned something, you said productivity, and that reminded me of what we need to just address here is if you're a good steward, you are worried about that productivity in the big scale of the organization. And I say organization, it could be your family, by the way. You have to be a good steward in your family, your job, wherever it may be. Stewardship requires you to take your responsibilities to the degree that is needed to address it, not to be a bully, not to be a power hunger person, but someone who is just taking the responsibilities given to them seriously enough so that they can address issues quickly enough or opportunities. Either way, you are responsible for these things as the steward.
Sometimes I listen to the things you're saying and I'm like, well, I wish Rob would have told me that 30 or 40 years ago. I sure could have used that. We say to have that conversation at the onset before it gets to the point where you can't control it anymore. If you have it at the very beginning, but given that way to look at it, I think is huge as well. We tend to look at the person. I try to look at the personality. And what you're saying is, let's look at the asset. let's look at how this asset is affecting the rest of it. It is a good idea to look at them as a tool in the productivity or in the manufacturing line, because if you had a machine that's not acting correctly and is having a negative impact. So say you are an assembly line and whatever's happening at this station may not have a negative impact here, but as you get down the line, the end results are negative. You're going to make a correction with that tool, regardless of the expense, based on the outcome. And most likely you're going to do that as soon as you see the defect and before while the machine could still be repaired before it needs to be replaced. So yeah, I think that's excellent, especially in the framework or in the idea of stewardship. These are tools. These are part of what you've been given to do your job, and you need to take care to do that. Just like you said, when you look at it again from a stewardship lens, if you will, that's also going to keep you mindful to keep your emotions out of it. There is an individual at one of the companies I've worked. I say about this individual, they are intelligent. They have a lot to offer in a unique area where we need that knowledge. And my phrase is, if that individual worked for me, they would not. The reason is there's no team. It's all angst. It's all tension. It's all animosity. And in my personal opinion, disrespect. I'm not in a position to affect that individual. And I will say that I've had personal conversations with the individual. I've tried to encourage them, tried to do other things, and it just hasn't worked. And it's my opinion that should be addressed now because it's affecting the end of the assembly line. And I know what we're doing instead is waiting because there's an expectation person's going to retire soon. Going all the way back to that CEO, how many people has that already affected and how many is it going to affect as we move forward? When we referenced earlier about I could do better or I would do it, that's the wrong way for us to look at it. But it is a good way for a leader to look backwards because they're watching what you're doing. They're watching it. Some of them aren't looking for your praise. They just want to do a good job. They just want good for the company. They just want what's right. And you not addressing that simple issue at the onset is eventually going to change the mindset of that person. Coming from a union perspective, whether it be as a union member, as a union representative, as a leader, young, or as a leader in my current position, I could tell you it's very rare, if not completely out of the question, to think that you could put a good person in a negative situation and change the negative without addressing the negative. If you put the good with the negative, just like the rotten apple scenario, and you don't address the rotten apple, it's going to have an impact on the good. If you put that negative in the good, but you need to address the negative, or it's going to affect the positive.
And we have the tool that we need to address. We said this on other podcasts before. Don't treat people as tools. Don't treat them like machines, treat them like people. So even though you might see them as a tool for a segment, that doesn't mean you treat them like a piece of equipment that can be tossed around, thrown out. You treat them with respect throughout the whole time. So I just didn't want any, especially emerging leader, well, they said they were a tool. Yeah, they were a tool. You and I are tools, but we are also people. So don't treat us like machines. That's an excellent point.
You treat them like a tool in the understanding that you need to handle it before it gets worse. When you address the individual, and those always require unique personalities as well.
Yeah. I like your comment about, if you put a good person, a good apple with a bad apple, basically, that bad apple is going to rub off, going to have some kind of impact. And hopefully the good apple will sprout legs and walk away or tell somebody about what's going on. That's why they're a good apple. But if you leave that environment rotten, I mean, that's poor stewardship. That's poor leadership. And we certainly don't want anyone to have to figure out, do I need to leave this place? Because no one's taking care of what needs to be taken care of. The phrase that people don't leave jobs, they leave leaders. And the reason they leave leaders is because leaders don't take the actions required. So don't let that be you. Don't let it be me. That's where we have to be.
Well said.
All right, Ed, I want to tell you about another gentleman. I kind of call the story,
Get her done.
Get her done. In this story, Ed, there was a business owner of a lawn care business. It was a neat story. The gentleman had an injury, had something happen to his leg where it was amputated. after all that, you sit around and imagining where you could be. I mean, if you had lost a limb like that, what would you be thinking? It's something that would have a significant impact on me. For example, I walk around every day or every other day, miles every day, and not being able to do that would have a significant impact. Nonetheless, your business is impacted because you are no longer out there able to do all the stuff that you were doing. Bills will then begin to pile up, and you have a couple of choices. You can get up or give up. And what I like about this story is that the man figured out, you know what? I'm in the wheelchair. That's how I get around. I have a riding lawnmower. I can still drive that riding mower. So instead of giving up and saying, I'm useless, instead of being reclusive, I think the man made a courageous decision to be a part of the business he had started. And look, I can't do everything, so I'm going to hire some of the work out. And he rides around mowing what he can on the rider. Meanwhile, he has other people doing the trim work and doing the cleanup that needs to be done and associated with that. So not only was he courageous in getting back out into the world and not just being helpless, but he's being inspiring. He's not just sitting there. Other people are seeing, what is this guy doing? If he can do it, well, I can go out. Or those who are working for him, I can help him. I want to help him because he's willing to do something that so many people, including myself, might find myself saying, oh, can I actually go out there? Well, what would people think? Does it matter what they think? You want to be active. You've got the ability to some degree. I just love the way that that story comes together. The courage, it's a different kind of courage, if you will, but nonetheless, all the pressures and all the things that's going on, I think it was just very inspiring again for me to see.
So that we don't bypass the courage, as you said, so many things have to be going through your mind. Yeah, you don't want to be ridiculed, but you also don't want people to feel sorry for you. You don't want, there's so many things, especially based on when we talk about building up to that situation, especially based on who that person was prior to that situation, right? Then throw a little bit in there of what caused, the incident. And maybe they're worried, hey, I only got one leg left. I don't want to lose that other leg. And I don't want to make light of that. I'm not joking, but all of the different things that go through your mind and the courage it takes to face this new situation. I also don't want to bypass the grit portion of what you said, right? So much more impactful than get her done. Get her done is hilarious and it's a great byline. I think you should replace that with grit her done, because look at the work that was involved. So it's easy to say that he is able to move from the wheelchair to the riding lawnmower. And as an individual that, because I'm a hoarder, currently has 3 riding lawnmowers at the house, I can't think of any one of them that could be done with one foot without some sort of modification. So there had to be, once he had that courage, now you have to do that work. Now you've got to move forward. Then you've got to go out and to build up your clientele, to get the individuals to help with the other part. So sure, the initial courage to do it. I mean, starting a business on your own anyway is difficult. That's why if it was that easy, everybody would be doing it. But yeah, just so much around that example. Like you said, I do think touching is a good word. I do think it's a great example of both the courage and the work, and a good example of emotion getting involved.
Yeah, that's awesome. So in reality, what does courage do for your team, if you have a team, or what does it do for your family, assuming you have a family? What is courage?
I think we've already given a good example. If you are a courageous leader, then it's going to spread. You're going to build the courage up, and you're going to build the esprit de corps, all of the rest of the things that go with that. Same thing with your family. Anytime you see somebody stepping out on some of these talent shows or singing shows, you hear them say that phrase, I'm just trying to show my kids to chase their dream. So it is the example. And that's great. That's what we're supposed to do, especially as a leader, is set the example. But it also has a lot of little things that build up to big things. If you're a courageous leader and you're willing to address in a professional manner your leaders or situations that affect your employees or other departments that aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing to assist your employees, it's going to benefit your employees. Same thing with your family. We talk about moving forward and life visions, and that's excellent, because if I have the courage to eventually someday get into this speaking thing, then that could have a good impact on my family as far as how we live. But having individual courage every day to face some of the things that I have to face in my everyday life and my work life, in disciplining your children even, is going to have, I mean, that takes a lot of courage. You know, the toddler to what, 7, 8, 9, 10, where we're the superhero, right? We don't want to be the bad guy. But you've got to apply courage in those scenarios and take a chance without the emotion. And like you said, without beating them like a tool. I still like that. It takes courage to address even the issues in your household. I don't think it could be exaggerated or talked about enough, because so much of our everyday little decisions require the courage to face the fear of what's going to happen at the other side of it.
We've talked a lot about this earlier, but it really comes out being able to face it. You have to ask yourself, are you willing to face it? Why am I going to face it? You've decided to be that leader, or you've been thrown into the leadership role you're in. And now it's time to focus on doing what needs to be done. It's time to remember what you're basing that on, so that you have the faith, you have the courage, and don't do it with a bad attitude. If that's where you are, it might be time for a change. And so that's a good self-reflection. We talked about reflection. Make sure you do that. If you're not doing it out of the best intentions, if it's still about, I can do a better job, then perhaps you haven't evaluated the real reason you're in leadership, or at least what we consider the proper reason you're in leadership, because it's not about us anymore.
That's huge. And Rob, I know that you've equated the courage in an emerging leader to basically an act of stewardship. And that's huge. Yeah. That's huge, right? I've never looked at it in that respect. That's your job. You know, when I look at when you have those union reps, especially when they're new, they don't really want to say anything. They don't want to upset the apple cart. I mean, they are the boss. Or, hey, I might have to put in this time claim. No, that's your job. You need to face that because you've been put in a position to, and again, as a tool to use in that position to further your people. So before you step down, and you're exactly right, if you do that self-evaluation and these are things that you can't see yourself doing, you should do yourself a favor and step back. The one thing I would remind you of is you're still going to be in a scenario of leadership, whether it's with your family, whether it's your coworkers watching you. So you're never going to get completely away from it. But maybe that's not your role. You're right. Maybe you need to step back. More importantly, I think you should look at it and remind yourself, this is something that I'm required to do. And if I'm going to have to do it anyway for myself, maybe I should go ahead, since I'm in the position, and do it for other people. I think that's just a great way. I wish I could explain it the way I'm thinking it, but I think that's powerful to look at courage as an act of stewardship in a leadership role. I think that's phenomenal, because if you ain't got it, who's going to suffer? Your people.
That's right. We're all going to suffer. All right. So, hey, keep thinking on that. Maybe you'll come up with the best way to say that, and you can share it with us. And more importantly, share it with your teams as they have their own responsibility. Right? So that would be good for them.
We've talked about a lot, but if you break it down to summarize it, the most courageous thing I think that you could do, the most courageous first step you could take, is to get that vision, get that picture of what it looks like. We're talking to emerging leaders. We're talking to people that are early in the game. Where do you see yourself? And if maybe even who do you see yourself emulating? That's the decision I need to make. I'm going to be this type of leader. I've shared before, when I became a leader of leaders, I made the decision that I want to be the type of leader that I've wanted to be. And we referenced earlier, we do that judgment, right? So I have those ideas of what I want the leader to be. So when I'm making my next step, I have a way forward. I know what my purpose is. I know the role that I'm in. The most important thing with the big step is taking that first step. Once you take that first step, every step behind that's going to get a little easier and a little easier. We talked about doing a recap of your own, if you will, or an evaluation. Take time out to assess how you did in that specific scenario or how you're doing in another scenario. Share that with a trusted individual who's going to give you honest feedback. Let them give you feedback on your own evaluation, and then ask them for their feedback on how you're doing. But get that trusted individual so that you share that vision with them, you share your goals with them, you share your assessment of those goals, and then you accept their evaluation of how you're doing. Use it to move forward. When you are evaluating yourself, And don't focus only on the things that you did wrong, which is typically where our brains go, unless you're egotistical. Do that, but look at what you did well. Look at what you did right and carry that forward, and then work to mitigate the stuff that you did wrong.
All right. Thank you, Ed. That's Forge Freedom today. This is a journey. And this week, we want you to get comfortable with being courageous. Find ways to be courageous. Don't simply avoid things because they're hard. And speaking of something courageous, subscribe. It's not a big deal. Subscribe to the podcast. Shouldn't take a lot of courage, but maybe it's a little practice. What might take a little more practice, a little bit more courage, is share this podcast with another leader that you know. They're looking for some ideas on how to grow themselves and maybe grow their teams. And as we go through this, one of the things I want to do is just share that you're not alone, but you are responsible for your life and for your action. And there is a verse with all this courageous stuff, Ed, that I wanted to share. And it is Matthew 14:27, and in part says, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." So people need to look that up and see how that applies.
Remember, a forge begins with the first strike.
Hammers up.